Hey, what's going on, everyone? Let me just make sure. Do not disturb. And then keep forgetting to, let me see. Justin, what is going on? I'm going to wait for a few people to jump in. I'm also trying to figure out how to share this to other groups. Let me know if you guys know how to share a live from my personal page to other groups here. If you guys know, Justin, hey, what's going on, man? Let me know what's new in your corner, what you got going on for the weekend. Joya, what is up? Good to see you guys. I'm just trying to figure out how to share it to another group here. Because I know Facebook didn't used to require you to do it from a personal page. So this is kind of new to me here. But we'll give it like a second or two and we'll rock and roll. And then we'll go from there. So I know we talked a lot about lifestyle stuff before. Yeah, Justin, by the way, you guys, like I always say, if you guys have any questions, Joseph, what's going on? If you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. Anything regarding health, wellness, I could even cover quantum psychology, biodynamic farming. In fact, the topic today, we're going to be covering, it's on the surface, it's kind of like a dry topic, but it's actually very interesting. And we'll be covering, Elham, good to see you. We'll be covering how to source high quality eggs. But while we're covering that topic, we're going to basically touch on, Brandon, good to see you. We're basically going to touch on the entire American agricultural system and food supply, which is a disaster for the most part. But if you know what to look for, and by the end of this call, you will know what to look for, you'll be able to at least source high quality food for yourself. If that's one of your goals and concerns, okay? I'm trying to get the lighting good here. It's quite dark in this room all the time. So we'll be covering how to source high quality eggs in the U.S. And it seems quite simple, right, on the surface. Oh, I just want healthy eggs. And how difficult could that be? But it's actually quite difficult, especially with the tremendous amount of greenwashing. So when I first started this subject and when I wrote my book, The Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide, is already, I think I finished it in like 2018 and then I published it in like 2019 or something of that sort. There's even less information. Luckily, there's more information these days in terms of what all the labels mean, agricultural practices. I notice, although the majority of Americans are still completely lost and completely have normalized like mental and physical pathology, at least for the people that their intention is to do the right thing, at least they have more information available. So how my journey in this field started is actually quite a long time ago. And I grew up off-grid on a biodynamic farm in Ukraine with my grandmother. And I learned about the basics of biodynamic farming and how to live sustainably with nature, et cetera, the different seasons, how to go to sleep at the proper cycles, and stuff of that sort, and proper organic food practices, how to drink high quality water, all that stuff from her. And then when I moved to the US, I kind of foolishly thought everyone farmed that way. So obviously on, way out there in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to have like antibiotics. You're not going to have various synthetic biocides like herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. You're not going to have beta agonists. You're not going to have synthetic fertilizers either. You're not going to have genetically modified organisms. And the myriad of other additives and preservatives and chemicals that the average American is exposed to in their diet 24/7, multiple times a day, because people typically eat multiple meals. And the average newborn born in a metropolitan area in America is already born with 200 plus different industrial and agricultural chemicals in their bloodstream already. And that's just how they're starting life. And that's quite troubling as well, because you have to think about it like like a newborn child. Their metabolism isn't quite that big, like a grown adult. So those chemicals have even a bigger impact on them, but they also have a bigger impact on you guys, even grown adults like myself, that's 200 pounds, because typically the volume of food you eat is quite high. I don't know the exact calories, average calorie per citizen in the US, but I'm pretty sure it's around 25 to 3,000 calories a day, because most of it is eaten through processed food and liquid calories, and that can kind of add up quite quickly. So when I came here to the US, I just thought everyone farmed biodynamically, organically, et cetera, et cetera. And on the surface, it kind of like, although if you have a keen eye, you know when to tell high quality food from not high quality food. But on the surface, it kind of looks all the same. You know, like this bell pepper looks like this bell pepper. This egg looks like this egg. This piece of fish looks like this piece of fish, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite difficult to tell. And then foolishly, a lot of people would presume, well, the nutrient content, the nutrient value, and the toxic load is going to be quite the same because the food looks all the same, you know, but it couldn't be further from the truth. And it took me a long time to find that out personally. And I eventually did by running into a random YouTube video, which I would recommend all of you guys to watch. It's pretty comprehensive and very presented by a good, entertaining presenter as well. It's called The Dirt Facts by Paula Check. And great presentation about American agriculture, which we're going to talk about here, but we're going to gear it towards sourcing high quality eggs here. And in short, he was presenting a lot of great information, touching on, you know, that 50% of Americans also develop cancer within their lifetime. And a large toxic load in a person's body does result in higher incidences of cancer, especially when combined with, poor sleep, chronic stress, and especially a high body fat percentage. So for males, a high body fat percentage is typically anything that's too far above 15%. So think about it this way, like 20% for a male is considered overweight and 25% for a male is considered obese. And you definitely don't want to be over the 20% mark for sure. Even 15% is probably the ceiling. And I try to usually be between 10 or 12%. The optimal body fat range for males, I would say, from my observation, is 10 to 12%. And that's when you notice their metabolic numbers greatly improve as well. So that would be like the resting blood glucose, triglyceride levels, HDL, some hormonal levels as well, like total testosterone, free testosterone, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a subject that you want to take lightly, because imagine like you go to lunch. So we're on Saturday. If you go to lunch with your friends and you're sitting there with 4 people, you being one of them, 2 of you will get cancer. Okay. And 1 out of those 2 will, 50% of those die from it. Okay. So 25% of people die from cancer. So it's quite high. And then when you factor in heart disease, Kaber, Ezer, good to see you, Evan. I saw a few other people jumped in. And when you factor in heart disease, heart attacks, I mean, you're looking at 33% of males die from heart attacks. 1 out of every 4, die from cancer. And then when you take into consideration strokes, alcohol abuse, medical malpractice is the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S., from properly prescribed medical drugs. On top of that, you have close to 135,000 Americans dying every single year. And that number is quite startling, because in the whole entire Vietnam War, in terms of actual deaths in combat, I mean, you're looking at about like 50 to 60,000 in a 10-year span. But every single year, you have about 135,000 Americans dying from medical malpractice every single year, year after year after year, and 800,000 Americans dying from heart attacks every year. 800,000. Remember, during the whole COVID thing, we're all up in arms when a lot of people were dying from the virus, although it was mostly morbidly obese people that had various health problems already. Why aren't we up in arms when we're losing 800,000 Americans just to heart attacks every year? And it's the sad part is it's so easy to not get a heart attack. It's so easy and requires such minor life modifications and dietary modifications, barely any attention, and you will most definitely not have a heart attack and most likely decrease your chances of all cancers by a gargantuous amount. Walter, Damon, Alfredo, Tim, long time no see. David is in the house as well. Good to see you guys. So anyways, check it out, YouTube. The Dirt Facts presented by Paula Check. Amazing presentation. And basically, he was talking about also comparing factory farming, industrial agriculture with biodynamic farming, okay, which is what I endorse and promote. And biodynamic farming, for the people that don't know what it is, it's just a fancy word that simply means there's a lot of biodiversity on the farm. So you have a lot of different crops, you have a lot of different animals. There's typically sustainable rotation practices so the land isn't depleted. There's very little inputs overall, so it could be self-sustaining. Definitely, it's more organically themed practices. So you're not going to be seeing like atrazine or glyphosate or any of these synthetic biocides used on those farming practices, which disrupt the soil food web quite a bit, which in a sense cause a tremendous amount of trouble in terms of sustainable farming practices later on. But anyways, so after watching that video, I was like, oh shoot, maybe those eggs I was buying for like 50 eggs for like $3 weren't raised on pasture, and et cetera, just like my grandmother did. And it started an investigation for me that I thought initially would just last, like a week or two, because I'm already quite educated on health and wellness. I'm like a certified nutritionist, lifestyle coach, personal trainer, author of et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to find out the answer to this quite quickly. And it turned out to be actually very, very difficult to find high quality eggs in America, especially at the supermarket level. So I'm here to fast track it for you guys. So try to save you at least like 4 years of investigative study. Just to give you an idea, for 4 years I worked on various regenerative operations, interviewed probably 10 or 12 different industry experts on the matter, read probably at least 20 books on the matter as well, and then wrote a book eventually on it, okay? So I'm trying to fast track it for you guys so you don't have to spend that much time getting the answers and then just kind of learn how to source high quality eggs. But at the same time, during this video, just learn about American agriculture in general and understand that you got to be humble, guys. And I had to humble myself too, because I thought I knew it all until I started investigating this subject more. But there's a reason, 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically sick right now. And various people have like digestive issues, skin issues, these chronic health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And it's because of a couple of variables, but one of the main pillars is the food supply sucks. And people that, even the very small, minute of people, granted, Americans have normalized mental and physical pathology to the nth degree. I'm not even kind of focused on that population. I'm focused more over on the people that are sick of normalizing obesity, misery, medical drug dependence, and disease, and ready to go on an honest health journey, which isn't easy, but basically all that works for chronic health issues, and looking for the right answers. So I'm going to give them to you here. Honestly, I'm just going to give them to you for free. I don't care. I just hope you guys make the right decisions, even if it touches a few of you. So when you're shopping for high quality eggs in the grocery store these days, you basically have four different distinct categories, but there's various levels of integrity in each category, okay? I'm going to not try to make this too elaborate or complicated to explain, but also not make it too dumbed down, because you're going to lose a lot of the essence of the message. So basically you have caged, you have cage-free on the label, you have free range, and you have pasture-raised, okay? So those are the main categories. And I'm going to start off first with cage and cage-free, because they're very, very similar. So caged is basically an egg brand where you typically don't see any logos on it whatsoever. It's just eggs. They're usually extremely cheap, maybe $1 or $2 for like 12. And it doesn't say free range. It doesn't say pasture raised. It doesn't say organic. It might say all natural, which is a label that I want you guys to understand means absolutely nothing, okay? All natural, it's a meaningless, empty label that doesn't literally mean anything. So just ignore it when you say it. It's nothing special. When they also say no hormones or steroids used, that's nothing special as well, because nobody in poultry uses hormones and steroids at all. It's not used in poultry. It's mainly used in cattle. So When it says that, it's just saying the obvious, again, steroids, hormones, not used in poultry production, meaning turkey, ducks, chicken, eggs, etc., etc. Okay, so the two I would definitely stay away from are no label and cage free. And cage free is a little deceptive. So with no label, typically what you're going to see is if you walk into these operations, you're going to see a bunch of crates stacked on top of each other, and they're typically like the size of like typical shoe boxes, just to give you an idea. And they typically shove like a bunch of chickens there, like shoulder to shoulder, and that's how those chickens live their whole entire life, usually for about 2 years. And then after that, the chickens are spent, they don't produce eggs too much, and they typically then churn them into either pet food or something, because these chickens are so deformed. Imagine being stuck in a 100 square foot room your whole life. Like, you have to go to the bathroom there, no showers, nothing, with 4 people, like shoulder to shoulder. You know what I mean? So you can imagine, these are living organisms too. They have all the same needs, needing to have good hygienic practices, good space, etc., etc. They also get stressed out. So by the end of their egg laying process, they're very deformed looking. They have a lot of feathers that are lost. I mean, they're just, it's not something you'd want to eat. They just look very, very sick. So what the companies do is then process them into soups. So a lot of times when you eat the canned soups, it's those spent chickens that you're getting from those egg operations, most likely. No absolutes, but pretty high chance that it is. Or it's being processed into pet food, basically, et cetera, et cetera. So and then cage free is basically the same thing. They're not in crates, but they're in like a huge warehouse. And again, they're not allowed. Cage free is a little deceptive because they think, okay, not in cages, they must be outside. Not the case at all. They're just in a huge warehouse. So now instead of being in these little crates, they're just in a big crate, basically, like a big warehouse. And there are usually hundreds, if not thousands, of these chickens, like back to back. I'm sure you can go to YouTube and write Costco free range chicken and see what you see there. And then make up the decision whether you want to be eating that type of food, because there are a couple of different ways to look at it, and we'll break it down in detail today. But one, especially for those that do spiritual practices, if you eat the flesh or products of a miserable animal, you too will become miserable as well, because you inherit that type of energy, that type of energy as well. So cage free, same thing. I personally stay away from both of those. I do not buy those type of eggs. Okay. And you have to remember too, when you house or domesticate animals and put them in a confined situation, they obviously can't go roam for food. You know what I mean? So usually, not usually, always, chickens naturally, they go roaming for food and they eat bugs. They're omnivores, so they're not vegetarians. They're omnivores. They prefer insects, bugs, etc. But could also eat with grain supplements, vegetables, fruit, etc., and all that stuff. So they're omnivores, and the nutritional profile of any meat product or any animal product is going to be the best when they eat a species-specific diet. Species-specific diet, that's a very important phrase to remember, because remember, the nutrient density and nutrient quality of the food you eat is going to impact your health directly, because in essence, everything in life is made out of food. So like the ovary or the egg is made out of food, you know what I mean? The sperm in a male is made out of food, and then they combine. And then to raise the kid, you need food input, nutrients. And then the kid grows up, they need food throughout their entire life to form all 12 of their human systems, et cetera, your bone, muscle tissue, digestive tissue, reproductive system, central nervous system, respiratory system, lymphatic system, et cetera. So everything is made out of food. So obviously, if you're having poor quality inputs that has a high toxic load and not that great nutrient density, your body's not going to be able to get those nutrients from somewhere else. So obviously, you're going to be lacking those nutrients. And oftentimes, especially combined with obesity, a lot of hours of work, stressful work, etc., etc. That is how chronic disease forms and never goes away. And you have these kind of stubborn health issues, various sorts, digestive issues, reproductive issues. A lot of women or men are infertile these days, you know what I mean? Even at a younger age, et cetera, et cetera. And again, various variables responsible here for all of these health conditions, but one of the bigger pillars is just poor quality food. And that's it. And that's a big, big important pillar. So obviously when the animals can't go get food, the farmer has to bring food to the animals. And because, especially in an egg operation or any kind of meat operation, 80% of the expenses of that operation, so it's quite gargantuous, just comes from the feed you feed the animals. And so obviously there would be a large incentive for the farmer to give them poor quality feed that gets, the animal from A to B. Yeah, and with meat operations, get as many pounds on the animal as possible in a short enough time frame, stuff of that sort. So typically, you'll see on the label too, it says vegetarian fed somewhere on the carton. It'll say that somewhere on the carton. And this sounds fancy for people that get all of their information from Netflix, which is troubling in and of itself, but it's actually not a good thing to see with egg products because, again, the nutrient density in an animal product is going to be optimized when the animal is fed a species-specific diet. And a species-specific diet for an egg-laying hen is going to be an omnivore diet. So insects, bugs, seeds, fruit, vegetables, etc., etc. So when it says vegetarian fed, obviously that's not the species-specific diet for that particular animal. And on top of that, when it says vegetarian fed, if we put a microscope a little bit deeper into that subject, we'll see that it's really just corn and soy fed. And most often, if it's not non-GMO certified or not organic certified, which also means non-GMO, that means it's corn and soy fed. And that's it. So very high omega-6 food substances. So the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is going to be quite high in that food group. And think about it this way, your body needs omega-6, 3, and 9, etc., etc. You get into trouble when the ratios are offset. And the ratios here are going to be very high in omega-6 and fairly low in omega-3. And omega-6, think about it as like a pro-inflammatory food, where omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory food. And omega-3 makes your skin look really good and is good for brain health and just good for overall function in your body in one way or another for the majority of all of the systems of your body. So obviously, the high inflammatory rate is going to be better observed when you take the whole person's diet into consideration and also just their health in general. Like you can get chronic inflammation from just chronic stress, for example, or having an injury because when an injury first happens, there's an inflammation that occurs around that joint to help heal that injury, stuff of this sort. So it's not just from diet, in terms of the inflammation. But diet, again, is an important variable, very, very important variable to consider, I would say. So if there's no label, that corn and soy is definitely coming, they're genetically modified corn and soy, okay? That then is made through transgenesis A, but more troubling is sprayed with a tremendous amount of synthetic herbicides, most likely Roundup, which its main active ingredient is glyphosate, okay? So in short, what you want to think about when you're thinking about pesticides, I know a lot of people are like, well, the government tests it for safety and it wouldn't be at the store if it's not safe. So you got to get this out of your mind, okay? It's not accurate. They don't test the whole the whole formula, the whole product for safety. So they don't test the complete formulation in short. So a lot of common sense would say like, oh, you take like Roundup you see at Home Depot, and you take that complete product that you actually use in the field because that's how it's used, and you spray it on corn or soy or some carrots that you're eating or whatever. And then you test it for safety. So that's what common sense would suggest, and that's what a lot of people jump to conclusions on and presuming that, but it's definitely a not accurate presumption. So how the testing is actually done is in any complete chemical formulation, you have the active ingredient, which is the main player, but you also have like a bunch of inactive ingredients, which are usually listed on the back as a proprietary blend. So you don't even have the information on what those inactive ingredients are, A. B, in the testing scenario, they're testing only the active ingredient in isolation on its own. And that's it. And if it passes safety testing at that level, it's considered safe to be put into the food supply. But here's the issue. So what are inactive ingredients made for? Inactive ingredients are put into a chemical formulation to make the active ingredient more potent and be able to withstand various weather conditions to make it more durable in an actual environment. So obviously, when you take out the inactive ingredients, the active ingredient becomes less potent and able to pass safety testing. But it's never used that way out in the field. And then on top of that, out in the field, you don't use just an active ingredient in isolation on its own. You use a complete formulation, and typically a farming operation uses multiple complete formulations. And oftentimes, especially with Cirolini Labs, it's a French researcher that has a gargantuous amount of information on complete formulations. So not only are complete formulations far more toxic, sometimes hundreds or thousands of times more toxic than the active ingredient in isolation on its own, on top of that, when you combine them with other complete formulations, which is how it's done in the real world, that's the most important thing to consider. There's a synergistic effect that makes the chemicals, it could be thousands of times more potent than on their own. So when people say, these pesticides are safe, it's a data-free assumption because there is no data to support that they're safe, because the safety studies have never been done and not required to be done. And the few independent labs that have done safety studies on them, the chemicals surprisingly come in always far more toxic as a complete formulation versus an active ingredient in isolation on its own. No surprise, it's just common sense. But you guys as a consumer, you have to be consciously aware of this, because they're spraying this stuff on the corn and soy that then they're feeding to these hens in these caged and cage-free operations. And then obviously these things bioaccumulate, these chemicals. Many of them already are known to cause cancer, gut issues, various other disruptions to the various systems of the human body. They bioaccumulate in these eggs, and then you end up eating them. You could eat a couple every morning for your whole entire life. And then obviously those chemicals bioaccumulate in your tissue, mainly in your fat tissue, okay? So that's it. It's pretty simple. If you eat products that have these chemicals in them, they're going to make it into you. And I know a lot of times people are like, oh, there's such minute amounts, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the safety testing has not been done. And in fact, like a lot of the safety, a few studies that tested even 1 part per billion or 1 part per trillion, which is like literally one drop in an entire Olympic-sized swimming pool, has shown to have negative impacts on human health, okay? And ironically, the people that always are like, oh, this doesn't matter, this doesn't, and they're always wondering why they have health issues, why they're always chronically overweight, why they always have joint issues, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, it might not be specifically from this, but this is probably one of the variables for sure to consider, and an important one. Okay, and sometimes it could be just from this as well. No absolutes. Some people are hypersensitive to certain chemicals, and that's it. And even small, minute amounts, although every study will show that it's fine, will make this person feel bad or have some kind of negative reaction, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to know where you stand. But you have to understand that the safety studies aren't done on this, and there's just a tremendous amount of data-free assumptions, et cetera, okay? So on top of that, a lot of these safety studies are done in-house by the chemical companies, by their scientists on their payroll, and then they send in the results to the FDA, okay? and then the FDA looks it over, and that's basically, as my friend Andre Lou would say, he's the author of The Myth of Safe Pesticides, a great book you guys can check out. That's like a teacher giving you the exam and allowing you to grade the exam as well. So come on, you guys, we got to use common sense at this point and just see what's going on, And that way you're no longer just running in circles with health problems your whole entire life. And then on top of that, there's inevitably a degree of corruption too. You can look at the revolving door practices of politics and corporations. Look at the famous story of like Michael Taylor. Just look him up on Google. Working as an executive lawyer for Monsanto, probably one of the most freaking evil companies ever to exist. And then he goes and works for the FDA. And then while he's there, changes the rules to facilitate the labeling practices of GMOs for Monsanto in favor of the company. Okay. And then goes back to Monsanto after, then goes back to the FDA and becomes the food czar of the FDA eventually. So you can see these conflict of interest revolving door practices. And typically what happens too is people in government sectors don't want to rock the boat oftentimes with corporations too much or at all, because when they leave office in the government sector, they typically go to the private sector and usually make a gargantuous amount of more money. I'm talking about a lot more money. So they don't want to rock the boat with these companies and then have not a chance to work for them and make a lot of this money, et cetera, et cetera. So this stuff happens all the time, guys, all the time. And then you just have to be aware of it and just then make your own decision, okay? But that's how it works. And also another thing to consider is a lot of this corn, pretty much all of this corn and soy actually is grown in monocrop fields. So you can't have amazing nutrient density when you grow something in a monocrop. And a monocrop, you can think about it as like a single crop farming system, okay? So like you guys can go, we're on Saturday, if you guys go hiking, anywhere in nature, you'll see that there's a tremendous amount of biodiversity of like even within a single, 10 by 10 space. You can look anywhere and you can see there are a lot of different bugs, a lot of different grasses, in any kind of pasture, although if you look at it, it all looks like grass, but really you could probably have like a couple dozen different species of grass just on that single acre of pasture. So when you grow things and that's how nature has evolved to function and provide optimally nutrient dense food, okay? So when you grow things as a monocrop, a single crop farming system, inevitably what you run into is nutrient deficiencies because every plant has a rhizosphere, and it's kind of like, like we talked about animals, they need to go out there and get food. But plants, they use their roots to get their nutrients from the soil. And although the soil kind of looks inactive, there's actually a gargantuous amount of life within the soil food web. There's a lot of nematodes, a lot of different bugs, and there's just like a lot going on there. And basically through the root system, every plant has a specific ratio of fungi to bacteria, and it's important to keep this ratio balanced. And because this ratio of fungi to bacteria help attract various things from the soil food web that then feed the plant. And then the plant obviously soaks up these nutrients, and then you end up eating the plants, or in this case, the chickens end up eating the plants, and then you get those nutrients in the eggs, which then make it into your system, which goes back to, you can see how everything is made out of food, okay? So the type of food you source is going to have a huge impact over your health, over your lifetime, and the quality, not only over your health, but your aesthetics too, like the quality of your skin, hair, nails, your hormonal health, your metabolic health, et cetera, okay? So when it's grown in a monocrop system, inevitably what happens is it causes a lack of balance between in the soil food web, because inevitably you have just this one plant soaking up certain nutrients all the time, which never happens, okay? And once the plant kind of runs out of these nutrients because it's root system is only so far, and then in monocropping, the root systems are even more narrow, and it inevitably gets sick, just like you get sick. And nature's way of getting rid of sick plants is by sending in pests. That's nature's way of balancing it out. So when a plant is sick and weak, plants come in to get rid of it. Okay? Plants cannot attack strong and healthy plants. Pests cannot attack strong and healthy plants. Okay? It just doesn't happen that way. So obviously, when these pests come in, and because these operations are so huge, they're not going to change their systems. They're going to go full steam ahead. And in this case, because you guys have to remember, it's a vertically integrated business model, and they invest a tremendous amount in chemicals, in machinery, labor, systems, transportation, contracts with grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not going to change things. It's very difficult to change course at that point, especially if you're a public company and you got a lot of investors too. It gets even more political. Okay? And so what happens when the pests come in and you don't want to change your systems? Well, you got to spray. You got to spray various biocides depending on the situation on that particular operation. And when you spray these chemicals, these pesticides, fungicides, herbicides onto the soil, it disrupts that balance of bacteria and fungi that I told you about. Not in a good way, unfortunately. Okay, it's most always to the detriment of the fungi. You get a tremendous amount of bacteria. And then it offsets the soil food web even more, because a lot of these chemicals are detrimental to everything going on in the soil food web. And once that happens, it makes that cycle even worse. So next season, you have even less nutrients in the soil. At this point, it may even be dirt. And the plants are getting sicker because they're getting less and less nutrients. So more pests are coming around. And now you have to spray even more. And you can see, just using common sense here, like you could only do that cycle so many times before you depleted the entire farmable land, which is happening at an accelerated rate. So if you look at the earth and you see it as an apple, 70% of that is ocean. So obviously you're not going to farm any crops on there. And the remaining surface area, about half of that, is unfarmable anyways. So really you're stuck with 15% of the earth that's able to be farmed for food. So it's not that much. And most of that surface area is where huge cities are built. They're built on very fertile land all the time, okay? So what's left over is basically like 8-ish% of the world's surface that could be farmed for land. And already at this point, we've depleted half of it. So it's half gone at this point. And if companies continue at this pace, especially the big companies, that's going to disappear too. And then I have no clue what's going to happen at that point. So some things to consider, okay? But basically, then they're getting these nutrient devoid grains fed to the chickens. Those nutrients are not making it into the egg then. Remember, you can't just come up with these nutrients out of nowhere. And then you're not getting these nutrients either by eating those eggs. Sometimes they enrich it with different stuff like vitamins and minerals, but then there's a large conversation we can have on vitamin and mineral complexes, right? Nothing is like a vitamin C in life. You know what I mean? When you eat an orange, you get vitamin C, but you get a myriad of other micronutrients as well. Probably hundreds of thousands of different micronutrients that we don't even know exist yet, because we don't even have any tools to measure it. Like a piece of beef has 60,000 micronutrients that we can measure today, but I would argue that it's hundreds of thousands. It's just we're not able to measure a lot of it at that level yet. That's why it's always important to stick to whole food as your diet, and well-sourced whole food. And in my opinion, when you eat caged or cage-free eggs, it's not the best option you can make with what you have available there. So all these things are important to remember, right, guys? So after that, you have, what do you have? Free range. So this is okay. Industry free range, what that really means is you have like a huge warehouse and basically got like a small little patio. where the hens could go roam outside when they wish. But what happens usually, this is more so in meat chickens, they call them broiler chickens, but what happens usually is there are little entrances and exits, right, for the hens, but they're quite scared of the light that comes in from outside. So most often they really don't even venture outside into this kind of smoke pit at all. So really just they're basically cage free. And then again, it's because free range, it kind of gives an indication that they're out there ranging on pasture 24/7. And that's not the case, because again, with free range, you can look at the carton and you can see it says vegetarian fed on it again. So again, not a species specific diet. Hens are omnivores. Okay, to optimize the nutrient density of the egg, they need to be fed an omnivore diet. Also, when it says vegetarian fed, there's no way they could be roaming outside, because if they were, they would be eating bugs and insects, etc., as their first choice. So then they wouldn't be vegetarian, right? So again, it's a consolidated operation. So when the animals cannot go roam for food, you have to bring the food to them. And 80% of the cost of any kind of meat or egg operation is going to be the feed you feed to the animals. And the farmer is incentivized to use corn and soy because it's also subsidized by the taxpayer. You have to remember, a lot of these kind of industrial, agricultural, and factory farm type operations cannot even exist without the taxpayer subsidies. That's important to consider, because you look at the price tag of, let's say, a piece of factory farmed beef, and you're like, well, it's $4 for, let's say, a pound of that ground beef, in the packet that you see, or $5 or whatever. And then you look at the 100% grass-fed, grass-finished one, and it's like $7. And you're like, well, it's $2 cheaper. Okay, yes, on that sticker price. But you have to remember, your tax money was used to subsidize that grain that was fed to the animal to get it down to that price. Okay? So when you factor that in, it's like roughly the same price. All right? And then on top of that, there's the bigger issue that always annoys me. A lot of people say like organic is too expensive and etc. So first, guys, come on, let's start using common sense and stop normalizing mental and physical illness. And then on top of that, using your own money to fund not only unsustainable business practices, but unsustainable and unhappy life for yourself. The average American spends $8,000 to $16,000 a year on shit, eating out mostly, and alcohol. And then they say they don't have, for a 2,000 calorie organic diet all year round, 2,000 calorie a day organic diet, you're looking at like $5,000 to $6,000. And you don't have $5,000 to $6,000 for an organic diet, but you do have $8,000 to $16,000, let's say on average $12,500 for bullshit that's just adding to your obesity, misery, medical, drug dependence, and disease most of the time. And on top of that, literally adding zero value to your life overall, like sugar highs at best. Like, God, how many times have I seen a person that's overweight and medically drugged out to the max? They need like a half a bottle of Xanax just to get up in the morning to go to their job. And I see them spend a couple $1,000s to go to a European trip for like a week or two, And then they say, same exact people tell me they can't afford organic food. I'm like, what did this European trip do except provide you with some dissociation for 2 weeks? But now you're back to the exact environment and the cesspool that is leading to your obesity, misery, medical, drug dependence, and disease. And back to square one, with no solution. You're still sick, still looking worse than ever year after year. And then what most people do is start unwisely using positive psychology and reframing practices, which keep them stuck even more. They're like, well, it could be worse, or like I have this pay or whatever, I have this job security, whatever. I mean, the stories are bullshit and endless, and they keep a person stuck in cycles of misery, obesity, and disease, and hooked up on God knows how many drugs. And personally, I've never seen literally anyone use antidepressants especially and cure their depression. And, chemical theory of mental illness has been disproven a long time ago. I can't believe even people still believe that. If you don't believe me, go to pubmed.gov and go ahead and find a single study that conclusively showed that a chemical imbalance in the brain is what leads to depression. Good luck. You're not going to. So free range, it's kind of hit and miss. I would say more miss. Okay, so free range, I personally avoid free range as well because, again, it's pretty much kind of roughly the same as cage free. There are some exceptions, no absolutes. There's some great companies, but it's extremely rare to find those. So the next thing we're looking at is a pasture raised operation. And the good thing is you see these more often in the grocery store these days. And of course, there are various levels of integrity of each type of operation. So like you can go to happy-hens.com. It's an OC company. I forgot exactly where they were in OC, but that's a great example. I'll try to put it in the show notes, the link, but that's a great example of an A+ egg laying operation. Okay. Each hen has, I think, like 250 square feet of space. They rotate their hens daily on kind of mobile carts. So the hens kind of sleep in these carts during the night, and then they kind of move them to another portion of the pasture during the day. So this is great because a lot of times the hens are then using their feet and also their poop to fertilize the ground, etc., and put nutrients into the ground with their feet. And then once you move them to another pasture, then the grass regrows there, attracts insects and stuff of that sort. So it kind of rejuvenates the land, okay, and doesn't use up the land. There are also corn and soy free operations as well. So if that's something you want to consider, that's also a great thing. And they're USDA organic certified also, okay, which means non-GMO. So remember, non-GMO doesn't mean organic. It just means the seed itself is not genetically modified. But they could still be sprayed with a whole bunch of chemicals. But when you get organic, those chemicals, synthetic chemicals, are not used, and it's also non-GMO. Now, some people would say, oh, organic uses pesticides too. As a last resort, yes. But let's look, comparing salt and water or vinegar and water, which are organic pesticides, or copper, which is like what you get in your multivitamin mix every day. That is not at all comparable to freaking glyphosate and atrazine, okay? I usually hear this from influencers that have never been outside of the classroom, never actually done hands-on farming work themselves, and are oftentimes just regurgitating what other people said, like Dr. Eads being a good popular example, completely clueless on this particular topic, especially with the safety studies done around like pesticides and stuff of that sort, which is totally data-free assumption and irresponsible to kind of say that, because there are no safety studies done on complete formulations. So with pasture-raised operations, that would be the best bet. There's also Vital Farms is a good company, good enough company that's accessible to the majority of people. They have an organic and non-organic brand. I'll just go opt for the organic. If you look at the back, they say 109 square foot of space. That means there's 109 square foot of space per hen minimum. And that doesn't seem like much, but compared to the caged operation, which is like 1 foot of square space per hen, it's a huge upgrade. It's already 10 times more space. Just ask yourself, it's easy. Like, would I want 10 times more space or 10 times less space? And stuff of that sort. So another thing to consider is a lot of people get these confused, but pasture raised indicates the living condition of the animal, but not necessarily what they're fed. So you can have hens on pasture 24/7 and feed them genetically modified grains, okay? Or feed them grains as a supplement that were raised with various biocides, okay? That could happen. Or put fertilizer on the ground, and then they're obviously going to eat off that ground, and that chemical residue can make it into the nutritional profile of the egg. That could happen too. So pasture raised is moreover how they're living. but not necessarily what they're fed. So you want to be conscious of both situations. How are they living and what are they fed? And what other inputs are there, in terms of antibiotics, which is usually distributed through the water or given to them as a shot, like right at birth, and stuff of that sort, of different medicines. And that's kind of up to you, or vaccines, to decipher between what's important and what's not important for you. So pasture raised is how they eat, but then you also have to consider what are they fed. So if you see pasture raised and organic, that's great, And then pasture raised with a lot of room and organic, that's even better, because the more room each hen has, that means there's less crowding. And thus, the more insects and bugs each individual hen has to pick from the ground. Because obviously, if you have, hundreds of hens, they're going to eat up all of the insects quite quickly, So then the farmer goes back to resorting to using a lot of grains to feed the hens. And if you ever had chickens yourself, you'll notice they spend a large part of the day eating or scavenging for food, foraging for food. So they do take up quite a bit of food, okay? So I would go for that. I mean, those two great companies, Vital Farms, and I keep getting that one confused with Vital Choice. It's a great wild fish company if you guys are looking for wild fish as well, Vital Choice. That farm is mainly from like the Alaskan area. But Vital Farms is a great company that's accessible in a lot of grocery stores now. And then also my favorite brand is happy-hens.com, like dash, like that little line, okay? I know there's another egg company that has a similar name, so be careful. That's not a good company. The one I'm referring to, it's like a small family farm with a husband and wife. I think they have 2 kids. And they're from California. Last time I checked, they do sell at Southern California in particular. Last time I checked, I think in Ramona actually. Last time I checked, they sold their products definitely on their ranch, but also in the Southern California grocery stores like Whole Foods and stuff of that sort. So, yeah, so that's it. I mean, I hope that clarified it and also shined some light on the American food system and how it all works, okay? And why we are where we are today. The good news is, if you do have the right information, which I gave you here, literally all of it for free, a dietitian would charge you probably like a couple $100 just for this call right here to explain this very same thing I did for free. You can make the right choices. It's still possible. It's just you have to have a keen eye and not be deceived by a lot of the greenwashing that occurs, okay? So, wishing you guys the best. If you guys have any questions at all, I saw Mario jumped in, let me know. I'm happy to clarify anything, but if not, have a great weekend. I have like a friend here visiting from out of town, so I'll be hanging out with them today. And that's it. Have a great and relaxing weekend, okay, guys? Also want to share this really nice teacup that I have here. It's kind of like a Russian design. It's pretty cool. Okay. But you guys, have a good weekend. And if you have any other questions, just send me a PM, okay? Take care, guys.